My, is it? Yeah. Hey, good evening. Sorry I'm a minute late. I keep forgetting we don't start at 6. This is like the second time I've been reminded, hey, you know, I'm there in shorts and a t-shirt, just having a good old time, and then I realize, oh. So, filling in for Billy tonight, he had a weekend at the Opryland Hotel, and for some of y'all were there, and I remember when my kids were younger, it was just every Easter, right? Every Easter you're wandering around that hotel trying to figure out where you're going and trying not to overpay for a simple little meal. But
Well, Matt, how many kids were there and chaperones and coaches?
I have no idea.
Over 10,000.
Oh, like what were the Walter Hill numbers?
Yeah, how many Walter Hill?
Let's just say a couple dozen.
Yeah, I would say at least 25.
Yeah, so in any event, so I'm going to continue along with Billy's theme of let me teach you a Bible, or let me tell you a Bible story. It's more telling in the auditorium as opposed to teaching, because, you know, the collective wisdom of this group is wise. Thank you, James. Yes. So I talked to Billy and made sure that I wasn't going to pick something random that was going to kind of step on anything he was doing. So my favorite book of the Bible is, for a number of years, has been Judges. Judges is just, that's where we'll be tonight. We'll be in Judges chapter 6 through 8. We're actually not really even going to talk about Judges chapter 7, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But Judges is just such a fantastic illustration, and I think it is very relevant to our culture today, and kind of how we have this knowledge of God and the things of God and the things that we should be doing, and yet we can be heavily influenced by our culture and see things, and we can kind of parallel it to the book of Judges. Not that it's exactly the same, but I think there's some parallels. So I wanted to talk about Gideon, and I don't want to talk about the part that you go down the hall where the younger ones are, and when they learn about things, you know, like for example, David and Goliath. They don't talk about David chopping Goliath's head off, right? They talk about the first part. 'Cause you don't drop all the heavy stuff on the little kids, right? You don't want to go down that route. And the same way with Gideon, just like with Joshua. You know, Joshua, you'll talk about the fall of Jericho. With Gideon, you'll talk about how he defeats the Midianites with the torches and the pitchers and the trumpets, right? The ram's horns, the shofar, all that kind of cool stuff, and the 300 men. I don't want to talk about that. That's Judges chapter 7. Not because it's not important, just because that's been covered. I'm a big Paul Harvey fan. For those of you in here who ever listened to Paul Harvey on the radio, I love the rest of the story, because he gave you that extra bit of information. You're like, oh, yeah, that's pretty cool, Paul. For all I know, he could have been making it all up. It was very, very interesting. And then when his son took over, it just wasn't the same, right? It's like when Jim Henson died. The voice of Kermit was not the same, right? So I want to talk about Gideon in chapter 6. I want to talk about Gideon in chapter 8, and maybe see what we can take from that. Again, because we much like Jonah, we understand Jonah in chapter 1 and you know, running from God, and then chapter 2, him praying inside the great fish, and then chapter 3, him going and doing what the Lord asked him to do. But Jonah chapter 4, man, there's so much there that you won't get as a little kid, because it's kind of hard to take that. So think of this in terms of Gideon. We'll talk about Gideon beyond the battle, the torches and the pitchers and things like that. But I kind of wanted to at least set the stage for how we get to Gideon from within the book of Judges, right? I mean, Judges starts out letting us know that the Israelites didn't do what God had told them to do. They've forsaken God. They're worshiping the Baals and the Ashtaroths or the Asherahs, and we'll talk about Baal and Asherah a little bit. But you see this cycle in the book of Judges, right, where it starts out with rebellion. And then when rebellion happens, the Israelites get enslaved, or they end up serving some foreign power. And then they cry out, and God raises up a judge and says, "Go deliver my people." And the judge delivers the people, and then there's peace in the land. Generally speaking, within Judges, when there's peace in the land, and this is the first half of Judges, the second half is all kind of intertribal warfare, which is again, as we talk about paralleling this to today's time, the infighting that happens. But the typical period of rest is like 40 years, with the exception of Ehud. That was 80 years. Well, Ehud's a really cool story. I'd love to talk about that, but that's do that on your own. Ehud's just fantastic. All for those of you who are left-handed, it's even better, right? Because it's just a fantastic story. But 40 years is about the norm, right? Othniel was 40 years. Gideon will be 40 years and whatnot. But that's kind of how Judges is set. It's the same cycle over and over again. It starts out with Othniel, Ehud, and Shamgar. Those are kind of the first three that are named. We see Barak with Deborah in chapter 4. It starts out with Othniel does what he's supposed to do. No problems there. We don't hear anything about Othniel's personal proclivities or life. Ehud does an amazing, very, very courageous thing when he defeats Eglon, the king of Moab, right? And how he kind of takes care of him, and he runs out and runs up to the mountain and blows on the ram's horn, the shofar, the trumpet, however you want to interpret it, and all this great stuff. And then we get to Barak. And Barak does what he's asked to do, but he's the first judge where we start to see fear creep in. Because Barak says, "I'll do it, Deborah, but you got to come with me." And Deborah's like, "Okay, I'll go with you, but just understand that if I go with you, you're not getting full credit for this." And so if you read the story of Barak and Deborah, that they're fighting the Canaanites, and Sisera's the general, and Sisera's on the run, and it ends up being Jael in a tent who basically hammers a tent peg through Sisera's head. Again, that's more stuff you probably don't cover with the little kids because it's a little bit too graphic, but a tent peg through his head. And Jael, like Deborah, who's called a prophetess, right? She prophesies, and she prophesies correctly, that Jael gets the credit for taking care of business. It wasn't Barak, but Barak's the first one, and it's really a minor thing. He still does what he's supposed to do. He just says, "I need some Deborah, I need you to come with me. I need you to come with me." And she's like, "Okay, well, here's what it's going to cost you." But then we move into Gideon, and we really start to see flaws. But it also reminds us that God never picks. There's no perfect people that God ever picks in the Bible, right? They're all deeply flawed. And there's a level of flaws we as humans will rack and stack and go, "Well, I don't really have that problem," or this, that, and the other. But they all have problems, right? And just because they have problems doesn't mean that they aren't useful, right? David's a man after God's own heart, and David had problems, right? So Gideon's really the first one where we see this, and then it just kind of ramps up with the various judges, right? I mean, we could spend time on Samson. We know Samson had serious issues. Serious, right? Yeah, serious problems. But that's what I kind of wanted to cover Gideon here. So we get to the point to where Barak is the judge leading up to Deborah and Barak, right up to Gideon. And so once that happens, at the end of Judges chapter 5, which is really like a song, the very last thing says that the land basically had rest for 40 years. So we see that 40 years. And so we end up in Judges chapter 6, and we see that the Midianites are oppressing the Israelites. And there have been other groups before: Mesopotamians, Moabites, Ammonites, Amalekites, Philistines, Canaanites, like all these different groups that God it said, hey, you need to wipe them out. And we know, like the Amalekites, they're going to continue to be a problem. We see that with Saul, and it kind of makes you wonder how the Bible would have panned out in certain areas had the Israelites just wiped these folks out, right, instead of having to deal with them generation after generation. But nevertheless, the Israelites are basically living in caves, hiding out from their oppressors. I think it was in Vicksburg during the Civil War that people were living in hills because the unions were just constantly, from the river shelling the city. I think that's the closest kind of American type thing I can think of. But the Israelites are basically living in caves, hiding from the Midianites, because it's not just the Midianites that come out there. It's the people of the east. Just think Arabian Peninsula, modern day Saudi Arabia. We would you might use the term Arabs or Arabians or what have you, but it's tons of folks to where when you get into the numbers within there, it talks about them just being numerous as sand of the sea, like with camels and people, just tons of folks coming in. Every time the Israelites would grow a crop, harvest time, they'd show up and just raid it and take it all, right? Which kind of makes sense, right? Hey, let me just wait until you grow all my food, and then I'm just going to come in, I'm just going to take it, and then I'll leave, and then I'll wait for you to do it again, and I'll come in and I'll take it again, right? And so, but basically, firm oppression, right? And the Israelites have to cry out to the Lord. Actually, in Judges, early part of chapter 6, the Lord sends them a prophet and basically says, hey, you've forgotten who you are. I've told you what to do, and you people have not done it. And that's kind of why you're at here. So by the time we get to Judges chapter 6, verse 11, we find Gideon. He's there, and actually verse 11 says that Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Like the harvest was so small, what little they had, Gideon's having to basically prepare that wheat in hiding. He can't do it out in the open because he's worried about, people coming and taking what little he has. And so we know that the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon in chapter. I'm not going to read every single verse. I just figured so that we can cover the ground here. But basically, the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon, and Gideon's like, I don't really know who you are. Let me just make sure. And so he goes in. He prepares a young goat, and he prepares unleavened cakes. We see that in chapter 6, verse 19 of Judges, that he went in his house and prepared that. And then he brings him out, and of course the angel of the Lord basically touches it with his staff, and everything gets consumed. So Gideon now knows, okay, I'm talking to the real deal here. This is not, this is not me seeing things or whatnot. I'm talking to I'm in direct heavenly contact, spiritual contact here, right? So what we know about Gideon, what we see about Gideon is that Gideon will act, he will do what he's supposed to do, but he requires multiple levels of confirmation. Kind of like, I want to, and I know you said, you called me, and we'll talk about it in a minute, kind of his excuse, the same excuse kind of that like Moses will give, and even Saul actually gives a similar excuse, but then we get to the point with the fleece, right? And the kids will learn about the fleece, and that's in Judges chapter 6, verses 36 through 40, where there's first Gideon says, okay, well, if it's really you, God, I have this fleece, can you make sure that there's dew on the fleece, but the ground is dry? Okay, done. Okay, how about can you make the fleece dry and dew on the ground? And God does that as well. And so Gideon's like, okay, I saw my offering get consumed. I've done the fleece thing twice. And so he's ready to go. And then God, knowing that Gideon needs more confirmation, I said we weren't going to talk about chapter 7, but I'll mention verses 9 through 11 where God tells Gideon, hey, if you really want to make sure, Gideon, go down to where the enemy's encamped and go sneak in there and have a listen just to make sure. And Gideon and his servant go in there, and they hear them talking about, it's Gideon and his folks, and they've come, and the Lord's with them. And so at that point, Gideon's got like 3 different confirmation areas that he is dealing directly with God, that God has chosen him for a mission and that he's going to be successful in that mission. And so much like all of us, I think it was Ronald Reagan, maybe he was the trust but verify, I don't remember, I get all my presidents confused, but we in general, right, we don't trust a lot of things 100%, right? We want to verify things. We want to make sure that when we take an action, especially if it's going to cost us something, we want to make sure that when we act, we're doing it, putting our best foot forward, and that we're going to be relatively successful, right? Maybe when we're younger, we're just like, whatever, man, I'm just going to go for it. But as we get older and more delicate and, any number of things, we're like, if you try and get me to go skydiving, I'm going to run basically a 100-point safety check on everything, before I jump out of a plane unrestricted, right? We can't look at Gideon too harshly in that respect, right? Because he's doing what so many of us would have done, right? And so we know that Gideon and his 300 men are going to defeat the Midianites in chapter 7, right, 16 through 22. And like I said before, we tend to focus on that Gideon has 135,000. I'm sorry, Gideon does not have 135,000 people. He's fighting an army of 135,000 people. Gideon has his army of 32,000 whittled down to 10,000 and down to 300 ultimately. All right, so I've kind of rambled on about that. I want to get down to the actual heart of the matter here. Oddly enough, well, here's a sidebar here. Hebrews chapter 11, right? What people will call the Hall of Fame of Faith or the Faith chapter, what have you. All these different people are mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. When you get to the spot where it talks about those from the book of Judges, it's really Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32 through 34. And what more shall I say? For time would fail to tell me of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. And I notice who's mentioned in Hebrews 11:32. It's Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. All of them had flaws. But for some reason, in Hebrews 11, like Othniel and Ehud aren't even mentioned. Any thoughts on why that is? So Barak, his only fault really was that he said, I'm afraid to go by myself. Deborah, come with me. Like his was minor compared to what we see with Gideon, what we see with Jephthah making this crazy vow that ends up in the loss of his only daughter, right? And Samson, I mean, we could write a few things about how Samson was spoiled and, don't want to marry any woman from my own people. I want to go after the Philistines and all the things he did. And yet, those are the ones that are mentioned in Hebrews 11. And not Ehud, who did this wonderful, amazing thing and did everything he was asked. And Othniel, we don't have extensive reporting on Othniel, but Othniel went up against the Mesopotamians and he just took care of business. And there are no flaws that we see as individuals, but yet the ones in Hebrews chapter 11 are all people with flaws. Any idea why that is? I don't have the answer. It's just one of those things where it's just like, well, why these four? Why not these other two? The first two, man, they just, no problems. They went through and they took care of it. And yet the people with flaws are the ones that are in Hebrews chapter 11. I don't know. Maybe that means something. Maybe that means nothing. I just think it's interesting. That's all. All right, well, no thoughts on that. Then we'll roll back over into Judges. Again, to kind of summarize it, we got the Israelites here intermixed. They're living amongst pagans or people that are worshiping false gods, and they intermarry among them. All the things that God told them not to do, all the things that God warned them about, they're just like, whatever. Over time, they just do it, and they just keep sinking further and further into it. And it actually does bear to mind, when I talk about how it might relate to us today, do you think there's an effect? Think about us today. When I say us, I just mean just the United States. We'll just pick the United States of America. We think about a 40-year period right, where there'd be rest for 40 years, right? Like say we're at the time of Gideon, to parallel it, Barak and Deborah are done, 40 years of rest. Within 40 years, how much has changed culturally within the United States? Leaps and bounds. Turn on the TV, turn on any secular TV show. Take that show, go back 40 years. Maybe maybe it's a cop show, maybe it's a drama, maybe it's a comedy. And if you stack those two next to each other, in terms of what is allowed now versus what was allowed then, is there a difference? A massive difference, right? So in a span of just 40 years, how much has changed just here, right? It's just something to ponder. And I say it's something to ponder because that culture will start to infect us. I mean, it can. It just does. So Christianity in the United States, you can turn on TV and look at televangelists that will talk about the prosperity gospel. I know it's there. I've seen it. I saw an event in Chattanooga where the pastor, the preacher, televangelist had two black Rolls Royces parked out front, and I'm thinking, what in the world? I mean, I realize those are great cars. They even have little umbrellas in the doors and fancy, nice cars. But what does that have to do with my spirituality? Zero. But there are people that preach that when you open up your Bible and turn to Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, and God talks about pouring out a blessing, that it's about, if I send in my $1,000 seed money or whatever it is, that God's going to bless you and God's going to make you rich. As if God cares about you having a ton of money, as if a ton of money is going to bring you anything but further away from God. So today we see that cultural effect to where we have people preaching this version of the gospel, and I think that's what Paul was alluding to in Galatians when he talks about if anyone preaches any other gospel, let them be accursed. All these different ideas coming in. Think about that in terms of where Gideon is and where he grew up, right? Israelites, but amongst cultures that you got mixed in with, that God told you not to. And what are the repercussions of that? It's spilled out throughout the book of Judges, not just Judges, but Judges is a really good example of that. If you ignore what God told you to do, you're going to reap I'm not going to say benefits. You're going to reap the harvest, and that can be a good or a bad thing. And so, like I said, Judges and today, we can see some parallels. So, let's tell you what. Let's just roll into Judges chapter 6, verse 13. Right, this is the angel of the Lord talking to Gideon, and Gideon's being called and said, "You are going to be the one to deliver your people from the Midianites." In Judges 6:13, and Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." So Gideon is aware of his history, right? And he's aware kind of the general history of the Israelites and how God brought them out of Egypt. But Gideon is looking at today and saying, okay, yeah, I've heard about you. I've heard of how you brought us out of Egypt and did all these wonderful things. I heard about this from my ancestors, from my folks. And yet, look at where we're at today, God. We're being oppressed. I'm having to thresh out wheat in a wine press, hiding from all these people. We're living in caves. Oh, we're your people, Lord? Well, where have you been? That's kind of the impression that I get from what Gideon is saying. Yeah, I've heard about it, but what's the deal? Well, why is this happening to us? There's no inner reflection of, well, maybe we brought ourselves to this point by doing the things that we weren't supposed to. It's hey, Lord, kind of help me out here. And then Gideon's told, hey, look, no, you're the one that's going to do it. And then you get to verse 15 in Judges 6, and Gideon downplays it, and he says, no, not me. How can I save Israel? My clan's the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. Right? No, I'm not the right guy. Right? Moses tried that. It's not me, Lord. I can't do that. I'm not a good speaker, this, that, and the other. And Gideon's like, well, I'm a nobody. I'm from Manasseh, and I'm from the smallest, and I'm the least in my house of Manasseh. Saul did the same thing in 1 Samuel 9:21. Am I not a Benjamite from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way? Like Saul does the same thing before he becomes king. And so Gideon's just like, I've heard of you, Lord, all the good things you did, but look at where we're at now. Oh, you want me to go and do it? Well, actually, it's not me, because I'm nobody. I'm no one who should be in charge of this. And I want you to remember that when we get to, I gotta start rolling. When we get to chapter 8, Gideon's saying, I'm a self-proclaimed nobody, basically. We keep moving through Judges chapter 6, and we see verses 25 and 26 that Gideon's dad, Joash, has an altar for Baal and Asherah. So Asherah, depending on translations, Ashtaroth. There's even, when you get into the consorts or the female side of Baal, depending on where it's coming out of, whether it's Sidonian or Mesopotamian or Moabite, there's different names. But when you think Asherah, think the female complement to Baal, and it's going to be an idol made out of wood, right, to represent the female side. There's all these rabbit holes you can go down, and go for it, because there's a million different opinions on it, but that's basically what it is. Joash, Gideon's dad, has an altar to Baal and Asherah, and God basically tells him, tear down your father's altar. Tear it down, and oh, by the way, sacrifice and build a new altar, sacrifice 2 of your father's bulls. Oh, and by the way, and when you tear down the Asherah, use that wood to actually burn the bulls. So not only is he going to tear it down, he's literally going to burn up one of them, which isn't going to go well, because he does it by night, right? In verse 27 of Judges 6. Oddly enough, this self-proclaimed nobody has servants. Gideon has servants. He's a nobody from the least of his household, from the smallest clan, and yet even in these times of hardship, Gideon actually has servants that help him by night do this. So they find out what's going to happen, the next day, everyone wakes up, and they see what's happened, and they want to kill Gideon, and Gideon's dad basically says, well, Judges chapter 6, 28 through 32, let's see here, we'll pick up in verse 30. Then the men of the town said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die, for he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah beside it. But Joash said to all who stood against him, will you contend for Baal, or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he's a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar's been broken down. And so Gideon gets this name Jerubbaal, which you'll see it in Judges chapter 7, verse 1. Gideon's dad, let me ask you this. Do you think Joash, the thing is, Gideon cuts down the altar at night to Baal and Asherah. The next day, right, the people of the town and Gideon's other family are like, Gideon did this, let's kill him. And Gideon's dad's like, wait, hold on a sec. Can't Baal defend himself? If Baal's a real god, Baal will take care of Gideon, so just let him be. And I've always found that kind of interesting, and I've always wondered, why would Joash say that? Do you think that Joash was a true believer, like the others, in terms of we should kill him? Clearly, he doesn't do that. Do you think it was because, it's my son? Now I got to think up something to say to get them from killing him? Or do you think Joash, and here's where I'm kind of lean towards, maybe he was kind of just going along with the cultural flow, doing what was kind of expected of him, right? Do we not see this with sometimes ourselves and with others, where we kind of toe a certain line, not because we really believe it, but because we just don't want the drama or the trouble that comes along with it, right? It's like, I'm just going to stay under the radar, do my thing. I don't necessarily believe all this stuff. I don't necessarily support all this stuff. And I'm not talking theological stuff. Sometimes, like, where you work, there are certain policies, and you're just like, this is so dumb. And I'd like to go up to the CEO and say, do you realize how much extra work this causes me? Can't you just do this and make all our lives easier? But you don't, because the CEO could go, hey, thanks for your service. Bye. And maybe it's a good job. You know, maybe you got a good benefit. I don't know. But there are times when we do things, right, just to kind of go along. So I'm wondering if Gideon's dad is like, I'm in the midst of this culture, and I'm kind of 1 foot in here and 1 foot in there, and I don't want really any problems because I've already got outside problems. I don't necessarily want to deal with internal problems. That's a possibility. I don't know. Any thoughts on why Gideon's dad does it? Yes, sir.
Do you think Joash was a town leader, or it says the altar was built on his property?
Yeah.
It's his.
Yeah.
It was the men of the town that came out and were upset.
Yeah.
So is he like a town leader? That was the town idol. Then he had authority, said, if you touch my son, you'll die.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Chris is, for those of you that can hear, he was saying, well, you know, you think Joash was like a town leader. It was his idol, yes. And I believe it's in the previous verse that it talks about how Gideon, verse 27, he did it at night because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day. But yeah, I think his dad was somebody of note. Right. I don't know how extensive the idol was to Baal, but yeah, certainly it was his dad. So yes, he could have been, hey, I'm like the head guy of Ophrah, the town. And so I'm not just going to let you come in here and deal with my son like this. Yeah, it's a good point. He may have been in an indirect way saying, this is not how this is going to happen. Right.
Be able to say, you mess with him, you're going to die.
Yeah.
You argue with him, so obviously he had power.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and Gideon gets a nickname. Okay, we got 13 minutes, good. All right. So one more thing in Judges 6, and then we'll move to chapter 8, which is where the really, really interesting stuff is. Judges chapter 6, verse 34, talks about the Spirit of the Lord clothing Gideon, right? That's when he sounds the trumpet, but that sounding the trumpet, the shofar, should make us think of Jericho. That's what they did. Same kind of ram's horn, right? But that Spirit of the Lord clothing Gideon, we see this Spirit of the Lord multiple times in Judges, not just in Judges. We see it in Ezekiel. We see it in other places. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Othniel, came upon Gideon, came upon Jephthah. It even came upon Saul. He was king, allowed him to prophesy. But the one person we probably think of in Judges when we hear Spirit of the Lord is who? Because it happened multiple times. Samson, exactly. Yeah, the Spirit of the Lord, in fact, the first instance is it begins to stir in Samson. And then later on, the Spirit of the Lord comes. Now, I don't know what the Spirit of the Lord is in terms of, is it like Popeye where he popped the can of spinach in his mouth? For those of you who remember Popeye, where he just ate a can of spinach and then he was ready to go. But as silly as that sounds, I kind of think, it was very much at a certain period of time when the Spirit of the Lord came on him, you knew something was going to happen. It's kind of like any time in the Bible where it talks about the Lord being angry or hot with anger, you better back up because you don't want to be anywhere near that blast zone, right? So the Spirit of the Lord comes on Gideon, and I don't know how long that lasts. I don't know what it does. But it's just a very interesting thing, and we see it more times in the book of Judges than we do anywhere else. So it's kind of like they got that power. Much like when we look at the apostles in the New Testament, they had these miraculous powers, but it wasn't like they could just do it whenever they wanted to, right? Because if they could, Timothy would have never been sick. Paul would have, could have healed himself, any number of things, right? But the Spirit of the Lord it's just an interesting thing, and we don't really know. I'm going to add that to my list of questions that I have for God, which I probably won't even care, right? We all probably have these questions. If anyone needs the Lord's Supper, down the hall, room 105, I believe. Okay, so I've rambled on enough about Judges 6. We kind of see where Gideon's at. Gideon's like, I'm a nobody, but he did what he was asked to do after getting confirmation. He's cut down his father's idols. He built a new one. he's, his 300 men and him have defeated the Midianites, the people of the east. They're all on the run. They've crossed over the Jordan. They're going after him, and that's where, kind of Judges 7, chapter 7 ends, and we kind of roll into Judges chapter 8. Here we're going to see, again, remember, Gideon says, I'm a nobody. I'm from the least of my household, the smallest clan. Who am I to do this? He starts doing this. Then we get to chapter 8, verses, I'm going to kind of summarize in the interest of time. Verses 4 through 9, Gideon is on the run. They're starving. They're tired. He goes to the town of Succoth, and he says, hey, I need some bread for me and my men. And the town of Succoth is he's like, I'm hunting down the last two kings, princes, whatever, Zebah and Zalmunna, because Oreb and Zeb have already been killed. So there's 4 kind of leaders I'm taking care of. 2 of them are gone. I'm trying to get the other 2. And the leaders of Succoth say, well, are the hands of Zebah, do you have Zebah and Zalmunna already? Because if you don't, we're not giving you any food, right? And then he goes to Penuel, and he tells the men of Succoth, he's like, you know what? I'm going to go take care of them, and when I have them, I'm coming back, and I'm going to deal with you, right? Kind of like your parents probably did to you when you were kids when, you know what? I'm going to go fix this, but when I get back, I'm going to beat you, whatever the term was that your parents may have used. I will discipline you. I will talk to you sternly. No, it was like you knew you were getting a whooping after they had to go fix whatever you did. That's what Gideon says to the people of Succoth. People of Penuel, same deal. Hey, you don't have Zebah and Zalmunna. We ain't helping you, brother. And he's like, all right, when I come down, I'm going to tear down this tower. They had a stronghold, the tower. And you say, okay, wow, how could you not help Gideon and his 300 men? These are fellow Israelites. How could you not help them and give them provision so they could go and continue on? They're on the other side of the Jordan, right? So they're a little bit closer to all these folks that are coming in and messing with them than Gideon is in his nice town of Ophrah in the Jezreel Valley, further towards the Mediterranean. And so part of me is like, would I do the same thing if I was at Succoth or Penuel? And I had these folks coming to me and saying, hey, we're about to go take care of the 2 remaining bad guys. And I'm looking around, I'm going, how many years have we been dealing with this? And you're telling me your little 300 guys are going to take care of the remaining, well, there's about 15,000 left because 120,000 were dead. Your 300 people are going to take care of the 15,000 people who I probably heard about retreating through here. I don't know. Kind of a tough one, right? So on the one hand, you want to say, well, why didn't you help Gideon? How dare you? And on the other hand, you're like, what's the reality? What would we do? What would we do in that situation? And we might do the same thing that those people of Succoth and Penuel did. But in any event, we know that Gideon captures Zebah and Zalmunna. He turns around, he comes back. He deals with Succoth and Penuel in Judges chapter 8, verses 13 through 17. Really cool imagery. I say cool, more like cruel imagery. He uses the thorns and the briars of the wilderness of the desert to teach the elders of Succoth. I think there's 75 or 77, I can't remember. I don't know what it's like to be taught with thorns and briars. I've been taught with switches on the back of my legs, and that wasn't fun. I can only imagine what you do with a thorn to teach grown men. I've been to the desert, over there, over here. There's nothing in the desert that's tiny and harmless. Everything's big and wants to kill you. So the thorns are bigger, the spiders are bigger, the snakes are bigger. So I don't know what that's like to be taught with thorns from the wilderness, but I have a pretty good guess that it involved a lot of screaming and blood and pain and probably raw backside by the time they were done with it. And then when he gets to Penuel, he doesn't even mess around. He just kills them. Just kills them. This is Gideon, right? A nobody. So then he gets to Zebah and Zalmunna in Judges chapter 8, verses 18 through 21. And he asks them a question. Hey, those guys you killed at Tabor, do you remember them? And Zebah and Zalmunna are like, oh, yeah. They were royalty like you. And he's like, oh, you know what? Those were my brothers, the brothers from my mother. And had you not killed them, I'd have let you live. But since you killed them, I'm going to kill you. And Gideon turns to his son Jether, however you want to pronounce it, and says, hey, son, kill them. and the son's like too scared to do it. And so Zeb and Zalman are like, Gideon, would you just kill us? Because you're a grown man and you have power and strength, and we don't want, your little son like poking us to death. Just kill us, right? So Gideon kills them, and okay, it shut off. So I just have to go off the top of my memory here. Gideon gets back to, as we round out chapter 8, he gets back to Ophrah, and they're like, Gideon, we want you to be our king and rule over us, you and your grandson, your son. And Gideon says, no, I will not rule over you. The Lord will. The Lord will. And you're like, hey, Gideon, great. That's awesome. Because you said you're nobody. You're out here acting like a king, taking vengeance on your own people, executing the enemies, right? Which is what God told you to do. Take care of them. Okay, check there. But they ask you to be king, and you're like, no, the Lord will rule over you. And then Gideon says, but you know what? The gold you took from the earrings, and the Bible says because they were Ishmaelites, so think Arabs, like they had crescents around the camels' necks and everything. All this gold. Says, can you just give me that gold? And he takes the gold and he makes an ephod. And the ephod, if you remember from like the tabernacle, was a specific dress that the priests wore, and they had the breastplate with the different stones on it. But basically, Gideon he takes all this gold and makes an ephod. We don't exactly know what it was. No one knows what it was. They think maybe he made an idol that was supposed to resemble God, Yahweh, and covered it with this ephod. Some people think Gideon wore the ephod and took over, became like priestly duties, like assumed the role of Levitical priest that was not his right to do. So there's a little bit of difficulty in knowing exactly what it is, but it does say in verse 27 of Judges chapter 8, and Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Ophrah, and all Israel whored after it there. Some of your translations might say played the harlot, whatever, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. And so Gideon makes this idol, and he may have had good intentions. Aaron fashioned a golden calf. Jeroboam, I think Tim Nance talked about it Wednesday night, made 2 golden calves. And quite possibly, when Aaron did that, when Jeroboam did that, it wasn't just God, Yahweh doesn't exist, we're pagans, we don't worship. It was more of just this twisted, kind of weird mindset of, okay, we're used to worshiping, the cultures we're in are used to worshiping a thing. So let's kind of do that, right? Think about the culture Gideon grew up in. His dad had pagan altars, and so when Gideon gets this gold to make this ephod, which the Bible says became a snare to him in his household, and he puts it up, we don't exactly know what it was, we just know it was some sort of an idol. Just try and wrap your head around why Gideon would do something like that. And maybe that culture that he was in had such an effect on him, and that was kind of what he knew. That was normal to him. That made sense to him, right? Christianity, well over 1,000 years ago, went through this process for certain churches called iconoclasm, where people were worshiping icons, like images, right? Like paintings or articles, right? Like, oh, this ring belonged to this person many years ago. A lot of it came out of the Roman Catholic Church, but to the point to where they were running around destroying religious icons because people ended up worshiping the object instead of the creator, right? People have all sorts of different theories about or opinions about, hey, should you wear a gold cross around your neck or a cross around your neck or a bracelet or whatever? And I personally don't get involved in any of that, but I understand where it comes from. The people that are deeply opposed to that, because it goes back, think all the way back again where Gideon was, this whole notion of you can have an object and that object can become almost like you're worshiping that, right? Even if it's representative of something spiritual, right? That's why we don't have huge ornate crosses with the crucifixion in here. And I've been in places that have that. There's some beautiful, is that the bell? Okay, look, last thing. Gideon, at the end of Judges chapter 8, I would say read Judges chapter 9 about his son Abimelech. Gideon had 70 sons by his many wives and one son via his concubine, via his, we'll just call it his girlfriend, and she lived in another town. But oddly enough, Gideon doesn't want to become king, but he acts like a king, and then his one son from a concubine that wouldn't be entitled to inheritance, his name was Abimelech. Ab, father, Melech, king. Like you probably met people named Malik, that's Arabic for king. So Melech, Hebrew, king. Abimelech's name literally means my father is king. Much like Absalom, Ab, Shalom, my father is peace, which ironic because David was not a king of peace. And Gideon, was not a king, but his son was named my father is king. Just names are so crazy. Sorry, I hope this was, I think we covered everything. Need another hour. But again, read Judges chapter 9. That'll talk about Abimelech and how it just gets worse. But Judges 6 through 8, Gideon, fantastic story. Chapter 6, chapter 8 have so much that we normally focus on 7. But that's all I got. Billy will be back. And I think I know he's going to talk about next week. It's pretty cool. So hope to see you. Actually, I hope to see you Wednesday night. But if not, you'll have a great week.
So animated, I felt like I was dead.
Well, it's a lot to try and cover, and
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to say the elders should take this to an hour, but